Jake woke to the stillness of early dawn. The sun barely peeked over the horizon and everything was blanketed in a thick layer of fresh snow. He shuffled out of bed, rubbing his eyes, and pulled the curtains aside. The sight outside stopped him cold. There, in the pristine snow, were footprints. Single file. Deep impressions that led from the woods beyond his backyard and ended directly beneath his bedroom window. The sight made his stomach twist. He was sure the snow had been untouched when he'd gone to bed. His breath fogged the cold glass as he leaned closer to examine them. Whoever had walked through the snow had taken deliberate steps. Each footprint perfectly aligned, as though the person knew exactly where they were kanter. Boawitur to tunter. Kuper sonto bon tangdurimang. And they stopped right at his window. No tracks led away. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He threw on his robe, slipped into his boots, and headed downstairs. He was careful not to make too much noise. He opened the back door. The cold morning air bit at his face. His breath puffed out in small clouds as he stepped onto the porch, eyes fixed on the footprints. The tracks were still there, untouched, leading from the woods to the house. He took a few cautious steps into the yard, his own boots crunching on the fresh snow, leaving his own trail beside the original prints. Jake followed them, his heart pounding in his ears. The closer he got, the more unsettling they seemed. The prints were too deep, almost as though something heavy had pressed down. The spacing was unnaturally even. He reached the last footprint, standing just a few feet from the wall below his bedroom window. He stared down at it. The snow cold and stark under the dull morning light. And then, as if by some unseen force, the footprints began to fade. The deep impressions softened. The edges blurred. The snow seemed to rise, erasing each print one by one. Jake blinked in disbelief as he watched the last mark vanish completely, as if no one had ever been there. A breeze rustled the bare branches overhead, and the forest seemed to exhale, its silence closing in around him. Jake stepped back, his unease growing. He turned slowly, glancing back toward the porch, and froze. There, starting just a few feet away, were new footprints. His eyes widened in horror as he realized they were facing toward him, leading from the open back door to where he stood. He hadn't heard anyone behind him. He hadn't felt a presence. And yet, the trail was there, unmistakable in the otherwise untouched snow. His gaze lifted, and his breath caught in his throat. The door he had left ajar now hung wide open, creaking slightly as the wind played with it. The footprints continued through the doorway, disappearing into the darkness of his home. Jake felt his pulse quicken, his body tensed with dread. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, the snow crunching beneath his boot. Whatever had been outside was now inside, and it wasn't alone. From deep within the house, he heard the faintest creak of a floorboard, followed by a whisper that chilled him to his bones. "Jake!" The voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but it was enough. He turned, sprinting through the snow, the cold biting into his face as he raced toward the woods, away from the house, away from whatever had followed him. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran, hoping he could escape the thing that now walked inside his home.